So everyone is talking about the autumn 2025 budget. I watched the breakdown by Martin Lewis. Damien Talks Money also made a video, and even Sky News had something out earlier in the week. But I wasn't quite convinced that this was the entire picture. So I decided, as one does, to watch the entire 1 hour, 4-minute speech by Rachel Reeves myself. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 6 things that stood out to me, particularly as an expatriate in the UK. And I'll tell you which of those things might have an effect on my investment approach or how I manage my money in general. Be sure to watch to the end because I'll point out one little detail that was also announced, but that most people for some reason are not mentioning because it seems small, but it's actually going to affect quite a number of online shoppers in the UK. Now, quickly before we continue, everything in this video is purely for education. I'm not a financial advisor and this is not financial advice. I'm going to link all my sources in the video description so you can check it out for yourself. But also make sure that you, if necessary, speak to a licensed financial advisor so that they can guide you through what would apply in your specific situation. So before we get into the changes, the first thing I'll say is don't panic. You have time before the rules will be implemented. It's not as if the minute they announced it on Wednesday, all those rules kick in on Thursday. I've been seeing videos talking about 3 things you must do before the announcement, 4 things you must do before the announcement. There's absolutely nothing you must do urgently. The earliest changes won't kick off till April 2026. And then a lot of the big ones actually kick off from 2027, 2028, and some even in 2029. So no need to panic. Just drink water and be calm. Now let's start with the first one that stuck out to me. Let's start with salary sacrifice. First of all, what exactly is salary sacrifice? It's basically an arrangement that you have with your employer where you give up or sacrifice part of your salary, pre-tax. Usually what happens is when you do that, they now contribute the amount that you give up, they contribute that into your pension. But in addition, because it's pre-tax, they also contribute the NI, the national insurance that they would have paid into your pension as well. And the national insurance you would have paid goes into your pension. So that sacrificed amount doesn't count as part of your taxable salary anymore. So you pay less income tax and you get more in your pension for the same net impact to you. Let me use an example. Let's assume you're earning 40 grand and you decide to do salary sacrifice and sacrifice £3,000. That £3,000 gross goes into your pension. Your annual salary becomes £37,000 and you only pay income tax and national insurance on that £37,000. Your employer is paying less in national insurance, so they contribute that into your pension as well. That's national insurance they would have paid on the $3,000, they contribute it into your pension as well, since it was already budgeted as part of your overall cost to the business. If you've used gift aid before, it reminds me of how gift aid works. Now, this is particularly helpful. I know we use the example of someone earning £40,000, but this is particularly helpful for people that earn a lot higher, who sometimes use it to keep their annual gross pay below £100,000. Because once you go above £100,000, you lose access to your 12K tax-free allowance and also any childcare benefits. And so that's £12,000 that is tax-free when your annual salary is below £100,000. Once it crosses £100,000, you start to lose that allowance until you start earning 125. By the time you start earning 125, you lose everything completely. So you are not getting any tax-free allowance. Now, that's actually not the only thing you lose. You also lose your access to childcare benefits and so on. But what some people do is when their gross income is increasing, as they are getting salary increases, they sacrifice that portion that takes them above £100,000 or let's say £99,000. They sacrifice it and pay it into their pension. So assuming someone who is earning £110,000, they may sacrifice like £11,000 move that into their pension, and then plus all the tax they would have paid on it, plus the NI they would have paid on it, plus the NI that their employer would have paid on it. So that's a significant chunk of money going into their pensions. And they still have their personal allowance to lean on. So it's a good way to handle your taxes. Now, what's changing on this one? From April 2029. So, like I said earlier, not all these things are kicking in immediately. But from April 2029, that's in 3 years, they put a limit on that salary sacrifice, meaning if you sacrifice anything above £2,000 in a year, then only £2,000 would be exempt from national insurance tax. You and your employer will still have to pay the NI on anything above £2,000. So if we use that example of the guy earning £110,000 and he decides to sacrifice £11,000, as of today, as of next year as well, that entire £11,000 would go into his pension, including the tax he would have paid on it, including the NI that he and his employer would have paid on it. But from April 2029, only £2,000 of that 11,000 would go in with the NI. So basically, the gross 2,000 will go into his pension with the NI that his employer would have paid. However, the remaining 9,000 on top of that 11,000 that he contributed, it would still go into his pension with the income tax that he would have paid. So it will still be free of income tax, but he will no longer be free of national insurance. What would happen with that £9,000 is he will still pay NI on it. His employer will still pay NI on it. But he would get that money plus the tax. So he probably would have been paying 40% tax on that £9,000. So that 40% tax included in the 9,000 would go into his pension. But the NI, the national insurance bit of it, he would still have to pay that. So it would be deducted from that 9,000. And then his employer too would need to pay that. So that's what's changing. Now, the bit that confused me initially was I thought, and I'm sure a number of people also did, that once you pay anything above 2,000 into your pension and salary sacrifice, whatever is left will be taxed as normal. It's still not being taxed as normal. So you still have a bit of an advantage in doing that salary sacrifice, especially if it is someone that is a high earner and is trying to avoid losing their personal allowance. Because it's not just the tax benefit that you are getting by keeping your salary below £100,000. You're also getting the personal allowance. You're also getting the childcare benefits. So there are perks, there are benefits to keeping your gross below £100,000. So people like that might still consider doing that. Between you and I personally don't, because my Nigerian self, I have trust issues when it comes to pensions. I prefer to manage my money as I'm looking at it, but it's actually an intelligent way to manage your taxes. So just remember that that £2,000 cap only applies to the national insurance relief, not the income tax. All right? You still get the income tax relief on all your pension contributions. So if you want to contribute, if you want to sacrifice up to £20,000, there's a limit. I think the annual limit is £60,000. But you are still allowed to sacrifice as much as you want. It's just that you and your employer will still be charged the national insurance on any excess above that £2,000. So what does this mean for me? Personally, I never did salary sacrifice in the past, but this is actually a decent way for you to manage your taxes, especially, as we said, for people in higher income brackets. Now, speaking of income brackets, let's talk about tax bands. Now, the second thing that has changed, and this is the one that is actually making a lot of the rounds, because when you look at, you keep hearing stealth tax, you be hearing fiscal drag. When you're hearing all those terms, they're talking about the fact that the Chancellor announced that they will be maintaining the current tax bands that they have until 2031. Now, the previous government had already extended the tax bands from 2022 all the way to 2028 before. So what they've done is add another 3 years where they're just fixing the tax bands. What does that mean? So right now, if you are earning below £100,000, you have £12,000 tax-free allowance, and then the next level, once you start to earn above that £12,000, it's not exactly £12,000, I'm just rounding it up. Once you start to earn about that initial tax-free allowance, you are taxed at 20% until your salary gets to about £50,000. Then the portion between that 12,000 and that 50,000 is about £37,000 thereabout, is now taxed at 20%. Anything above that £50,000 is taxed at 40%, which is the higher tax rate. And then, of course, it goes on like that. When you hit 100 grand, you lose your tax-free allowance. It continues to go. You don't lose the entire tax-free allowance. You start to lose your tax-free allowance, your £12,000. But they graduate it until you start to earn about over 125. Once you're past 125, by that time, you've lost your entire tax-free allowance of £12,000. And anything above £125,000 starts getting taxed at 45%. So those are where those bands are. That's where you have your 20% and your 40% and your 45%. Now, what's happening here is the government has not officially increased your tax rates. They've not increased how much tax anyone is paying in each of those three bands. 20% is still 20%, 40% is still 40%, 45% is still 45%. What they are doing is keeping those bands fixed. So your 125 is still going to be 125 by 2031. Your 100K cutoff is going to be 100K by 2031. The 12.5, the 50K, they are also all going to stay until 2031. But what else will be happening in that time period? Your salary will be going up because normally, year on year, your employer would increase your salary. So as your salary is increasing, you naturally, the portion of your salary that will be going into those higher bands would be increasing. So they still end up taking more tax from you. They're just doing it quietly without announcing a tax increase. That's why it's called a stealth tax. Because in an ideal world, they should be increasing those bands, not the tax itself, but the bands. As average wages go up, as inflation rises, they should be adjusting the bands for the different tax rates. Imagine you are earning £49,000. You have your 12,005 tax-free allowance, and then the portion between that 12,005 and that 49,000 is taxed at 20%. Let's say inflation goes up by 10%. And then your company decides to also increase your salary by the exact same 10% that inflation went up by. So that means your gross annual salary has now gone up by 4,100. So you've crossed over. You are now earning roughly 54,000. In an ideal world, because the tax band is at that 50,000 plus, in an ideal world, they should have moved that band up as well. They should have increased that band by roughly the inflation rate, say 10%. If they had done that and the band moved up, the new band would have been hypothetically 55K, meaning your entire salary will still be in that 20% range. But because they've kept the band fixed, that salary increase that you've gotten would have now tilted over into the higher tax rates. So that extra money is going to be taxed at 40%. It's despite the fact that it's not as if your buying power has actually increased significantly, because what has happened is inflation has gone up by 10%, meaning prices of things around you have generally gone up by that same 10%. Your salary went up by 10%, but because it is now being taxed, that 10% that it was increased by is now being taxed at a higher rate than the rest of your salary. Your buying power hasn't increased. Unfortunately, what has happened though is more of your salary is now going to be taxed at that higher. Your buying power has actually reduced. It didn't increase, it reduced. So net, you are not catching up with inflation. You'll be lagging behind inflation in terms of your take-home pay. So your company has done its best. They're giving you a salary increase to match inflation. But your buying power hasn't, because the prices of everything has also gone up by that same 10%. So you won't be able to buy more because you have more money. So in an ideal world, the tax bands too should have shifted with the inflation so that everything is balanced. But what the government is doing, they're not shifting the tax band, but the government is now taking more because you've moved into the 40% tax band with that extra. So You still have your 12,005 tax-free allowance. You still have your 30-something K between 12,005 and 50K still taxed at 20%. But that extra that your company gave you to be able to match inflation would be taxed at a higher rate. So that means your buying power, your take home has reduced. So the government technically is getting more from you. But officially they haven't increased taxes, but they're getting more taxes. And if we look at what happened in the last couple of years, we've actually had over 2 million people move into higher tax bands like that. This scenario that I just described has happened to over 2 million people in the country. But I think in the last year or so, over a 3-year period, you'll probably get like almost 1 million people moving into higher tax bands. So the government will get more taxes without announcing a tax increase. That's why it's called a stealth tax, because they're taking more tax from you without telling you that they're taking more tax from you. So if you don't do the math, you don't know. But how do they know that your salary will increase? Because naturally, salaries and wages tend to track inflation. Sometimes they go below, but generally they would go up somehow, especially in developed countries. No one's going to match 15% inflation in Nigeria. But the second reason that they know your salary will go up is also one of the announcements that was made. They've increased minimum wage. From April next year, minimum wage is increasing. So they're basically encouraging employers to pay more money so that they can take more money without necessarily announcing a tax increase. It's kind of genius, because most people don't do the math. Most people don't know this. All right, so when you look at it over a 5-year period, between now and 2031, a lot of people pay more taxes than they would have. That's why Martin Lewis was like, look, you might have been easier if they just announced the tax increase and then everybody knows. But they'll probably have gotten less tax that way and more pushback from people. So again, it's smart. Now, what can you do in this scenario? We just talked about salary sacrifice earlier. If you want to keep more of your money, salary sacrifice is still a way to do it. So if we look at that hypothetical scenario where someone that is earning 49K is being pushed into the higher tax band, they could decide to move that money into their pensions. They will just lose their NI contribution of that salary sacrifice. So they would save the NI contribution and tax it on the 2K, but anything above that, the remaining 2.9, they would have to pay NI on that. But they'll still get the tax-free income tax portion of it. So the 40% tax that they would have lost on that extra 2.9 will still go into their pension, which is still a decent amount. So that's one way one could address this. If you have enough extra money to sacrifice, that's one way you could do this, up to a point though. Because I think by the time you start to earn, for the real Henrys, the people earning over 200 grand, other rules start to apply. But like I said, I'm not a tax advisor, so I would suggest, if you are in that range, I would suggest you check with a licensed tax professional. They would be able to advise on how best to manage your money. If you are finding this video helpful so far, please do me a favor. Tap the like button below. It really helps the channel. Thank you. Now, on to my favorite topic, ISAs. If you've watched any other video on this channel, I love ISAs. Now, this one got a lot of attention. Even before the announcement was made, people had been talking about it. I think the first time I heard about it was last year, that they were going to change something about ISAs. But the first thing to remind you again is the change that they're making here is not kicking in until 2027. So you still have the rest of this year to invest in your ISA. If you want to put your money in cash ISA, if you want to utilize your stocks and shares ISA, you still have the rest of this year and you still have the whole of next tax year. The change doesn't kick in until April 2027. But what exactly is change? So currently, every resident of the UK has an allowance by the government of £20,000 that you can save or invest tax-free each year. Now, when I say tax-free, the taxes being referred to here is the tax that normally would have been charged on the interest if you had saved it in a regular account, or the dividends, if you had invested in a non-ISA account, or the capital gains, meaning the taxes you pay when you buy something at a lower price and it's increased to a higher price. So it is the tax on those gains that is completely tax-free, because they've already taken the income tax at source, remember, if you're a salary earner. So an ISA is an account that you can put that £20,000 allowance into, and you have different types. ISA stands for individual savings account. So you could put it in a cash ISA and it would earn interest. Usually interest rates in a cash ISA are quite competitive. So it will earn high interest and those interests will be tax-free. That's one option. You could put it in a stocks and shares ISA and you earn your dividends or you get your capital gains as the share prices go up, again tax-free. Or you could set aside part of it as down payment for property. So those are the three types of ISAs that you can invest in. You could do cash ISA, stocks and shares ISA, or a lifetime ISA. That's the one where you set aside a portion of the 20K allowance as contribution into a down payment for property. Now, as of today, and until further notice, the cap on your lifetime ISA is £4,000. And I'm using lifetime ISA as an example because what's being introduced on cash ISA is similar to what we already have on lifetime ISA. So it's not that new. But let me explain. So as of today, the maximum you can put into a cash ISA is £20,000. The maximum you can put into a stocks and shares ISA is also £20,000. But a lifetime ISA, the maximum you can put in is £4,000. You still have your full £20,000 allowance, but you can't put more than 4,000 of that 20K into your lifetime ISA. What is going to change from 2027 is that they also put in a cap on your cash ISA. So they're leaving the stocks and shares ISA. If you want to put the whole 20K in stocks and shares, great. They actually encourage that. Your lifetime ISA, the cap is still £4,000. We'll get to that later. But the cash ISA, they're reducing the cap on it. So now the maximum you can put in a cash ISA is £12,000. Now again, you still have your full £20,000 allowance. They're just capping how much of that 20K can go into cash ISA. The same way they've capped how much of it can go into lifetime ISA. So lifetime ISA's cap is 4K, cash ISA's cap is 12K. Stocks and shares ISA, for all intents and purposes, has no cap. You can put all of the 20K in stocks and shares ISA. The reason they gave for doing this is they're trying to encourage younger people, younger Britons, to invest in shares instead of just keeping their money in savings accounts. Now, people would debate whether forcing people or putting a cap on how much people can put in savings will force them to invest in shares. That's very debatable, because the fact that I can't put my money in savings, what stops me from just spending it? But then again, that's assuming people even have more than £12,000 to put in cash ISA anyway, because one of the things that I've said is they've actually done the analysis and most people in UK don't even put more than £12,000 in. Think about it. How many people actually have £12,000 a year to save that they won't touch? So especially if you consider median wages is roughly around £40,000, roughly £50,000 in London, people basically need their cash. So that's basically what they're doing. Now, because they've said they're trying to encourage young people to invest more in shares than just putting their money in savings, they've exempted people above the age of 65 from this change. So those ones can still put all their £20,000 in cash ISA. The reason for that is by the time you're 65, you're not doing a lot of long-term investing because you're trying to live your life. So they are exempt. But those of us that are still below 65, that are 64 and below, they want us to invest for the long term. Now, it's important to remember that those limits apply to the yearly contribution. You can have £100,000 in your cash ISA if you want, but how much you can put in every year is what is reducing to 12K. So it's not as if once your money passes 12K, the government will start to, the government doesn't even look into your ISA. People have over 100,000 in their stocks and shares ISA. You don't declare it, you don't do self-assessment for ISA. That's why I said it's one of my favorite features of this economy. So for now, ISAs, you're fine. What's really being capped is how much extra you can put in. Now, for any money that is held outside of an ISA, what's it generally called a general investment account. So let's say you just put your money in your bank savings account. It's not in an ISA, or you just invest money with a brokerage firm and it's not specified that it's an ISA. As of today, those kind of investments already attract taxes. Not on your principal again, it's on the interest and the dividends and the capital growth on those investments. They attract taxes. But what is happening from 2027 is that they are increasing the rates at which they charge taxes on savings that is outside an ISA. First of all, you have up to £12,000 that you can put into a cash ISA. If you decide not to use that cash ISA and you put that money into a regular savings account, everyone has an allowance, an interest allowance, an amount of interest that you can gain yearly before the government taxes you. If you're a basic taxpayer, you can earn up to £1,000 a year on interest. But if you're a higher taxpayer, if you're in a higher band, above 50k a year, then they reduced your allowance. So that's one of the reasons why I don't use cash ISA anyway, personally, because I only put my emergency funds in savings, and that's money that I'll probably touch once or twice in a year. So the interest I get all in that emergency funds, usually it won't pass the allowance that I have for savings interest, but most people don't exceed that allowance. But if you do exceed the allowance, the person in basic tax rates, usually they would pay 20% or whatever they earn above that £1,000 in interest. The person that is in the higher tax band would pay 40% or whatever they earn above their £500 in a year. The person that is in the additional tax band, they don't have any allowance for savings interest. So once they earn any savings outside the cash ISA, they pay tax on it, and I think the rate is about 45%. Now, all those rates will go up by 2 percentage points, meaning the person that would have paid 20% on anything above £1,000 will now pay 22%. The person that is paying 40% will now pay 42%. The person that was paying 45% will now pay 47% on any savings that they gain outside of an ISA. So that's one of the changes that is happening as well. So they are increasing tax, they're just not increasing income tax. Again, this government is sneaky. Now, speaking of allowances though, that's one of the perks of being married in this country, because you can't manage your allowances as a couple. First of all, you can transfer any amount of money you want to your partner during any tax year. So if you are in a higher tax band, let's say you are earning 90k a year, and your partner is in a lower tax band, or maybe she's a homemaker, she's a stay-at-home wife, and she's not earning anything. So that means basically she's not paying any taxes. You can use some of her allowances. Unofficially, I think there's a marriage allowance first. Again, check with the tax advisor. But when we talk about ISAs, you both have 20k allowance, whether she's paying tax or not, whether she's paying money or not. You both have 20k allowance a year, meaning even from that 2027 April, by the time we look at your ISAs combined together, you would both have £24,000 that you can put into cash ISA if you so desire. So if one person is earning that much, they can put 12k into their own cash ISA, 12k into their partner's cash ISA, and then they still have another 16k that they can play around with stocks and shares. Or if they want to put 8k out of that into LISAs, lifetime ISA, they can do that as well. And then they have another 8 that they can put into stocks and shares. Or if you are someone like me and you just trust the stock market, you can put the entire £40,000, 20k here, 20k there, into stocks and shares. So just buy a globally diversified ETF and go to sleep. So that's one of the perks of being married. Another way is you could decide if you want to invest outside an ISA, you could put just enough money so that you are not exceeding your tax band. Or imagine it like we said, if we go back to that same couple, where one is earning 90K, the other is earning nothing. The person earning nothing has a lower tax band. So instead of the person that is earning 90K and has to pay 40 to 42% interest on their savings, instead of that person paying money to their savings, they can just give that money, officially gift it to their partner, and then their partner opens savings account and puts the money inside and pays interest at a much lower rate and has a higher allowance to play with. All right, so those are some of the perks of being a married person in this country. We've gone from Rachel Reeves to marriage. A quick heads up, I will be running a 30-day live course built specifically for African expats in the UK. The goal is simple: to move you from just earning a salary to owning assets in the UK. We're going to make it practical, step by step. Taking an action a day will move you from one end to the other. I'll show you the exact platform that I use, how I structure my investments, and I'll even share some of the personal templates that I use to track my own money. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, leave a comment below and say 30 days, and I'll send you the link to register for the course. Now, before we leave ISAs, I just want to mention that they didn't announce any change to lifetime ISAs. There have been some recommendations that the way the ISA is structured as of today, due to things like inflation and property price moving over time. For instance, the average price of a property in London today is probably closer to $1 million than $500,000. Fortunately, the rules surrounding a ISA requires that you can only use it as down payment for property that is below 450K. Now, when you think about it, 450K, it may seem like a lot of money depending on where you're in the country, but if you're down south where property prices are quite expensive, then you probably have to move into a flat or somewhere in the outskirts of London before you can find property that is lower than 450K, meaning anyone in London that wants to keep living in London will find it difficult to use their investment in a lifetime ISA to buy property. You can still use your ISA as an investment in general, but there are conditions tied to that as well. I won't go much further than that right now. I cover that in another video. I'll link to it in the description. Speaking of property, let's talk about the fourth thing that stood out to me: mansion tax. I love that name, mansion tax. This is one that Damien covered quite well in his video. I'll link to his video somewhere. But the official name of this tax is actually High Value Council Tax Surcharge. It's not kicking in until 2028. But the plan here is to introduce a new tax that applies to properties that are valued above £2 million. It will be paid by the owner of the property, not the resident. So naturally, you'll be thinking this shouldn't apply to me if I'm just renting the house. I don't own a house that is worth more than £2 million. However, it will, because in this country, 3 things are certain: rain, death, and taxes. It will come to you. Now, one of the reasons they're probably delaying it to 2028 is because they need to do a revaluation of existing properties. The council tax today is based on certain estimates of property value that they haven't updated since the 90s. I think since 1991. Now, that's the first way that it would probably hit everybody, because by the time they revalue houses in general, they're not revaluing everything. They said they review houses from certain bands. I think it's from band F, if I'm not mistaken. But by the time they review those houses, some people already living within those places will see their council taxes also reviewed in general, whether that is mansion tax or not. Now, the second way that will probably hit renters is that by the time they introduce that additional tax that landlords pay, there's no assurance that the landlord won't simply pass it on through rent. I know they've introduced the renters' rights bill, unlike in the past where you had assured short-hold tenancies, where you could sign a lease and just lock your rent for the next year or two, which is something I actually did during the pandemic. Now, everything is going to transition into monthly rolling periodic tenancy. So every month you pay your rent. There's no need for you to sign contract or sign lease. Your tenancy just rolls over into the new month. If the landlord needs to use the place, they need to give you 2 months notice. You also need to give them, I think, 2 months notice. It sounds all well and good, but the implication is they can also come back this month and say, okay, 2 months from now, the rent is going to go up. Actually, I think there's a rule that part of that Renters' Rights Act where they can't increase rent more than once a year. And usually they need to keep it within the range of existing rent in the neighborhood, but again, unintended consequences. So that's the other way that it could affect tenants that I see. But then again, let's say you want to stop being a tenant and you want to buy your own property. This was one interesting bit that Damien actually highlighted in his own video. Because when you think about the fact that this government, and not just this current party, the previous government too, same thing, they like this idea of fiscal drag, meaning they put fixed figures instead of percentages or instead of pegging to inflation or anything. They just put a fixed number, £2 million. They can keep that £2 million there for the next 10, 20 years. It's up to them. They haven't reviewed property value since 1991. So might not do another review for another 20 years. So if they keep it pegged at 2 million, over time, in the next 5 to 10 years, nothing stops the property that you bought today at 500k from gradually increasing to that £2 million just because of inflation, not because you've done anything fantastic, just because inflation is going up, property prices are following it, and all of a sudden you find yourself living in a house or owning a house that is now £2 million. You're still paying mortgage, but the house is now £2 million in terms of valuation, and you have to pay extra tax. The other risk is that people that currently own property near that 2 million price mark, again, speaking of unintended consequences, people that currently own property near that 2 million price valuation could decide to start to sell their property because they don't want to pay extra tax. And then no one wants to buy the property, and property prices start to drop because nobody else too wants to pay that extra tax. And then you get the likes of Blackstone, not BlackRock, Blackstone, coming and buying up houses in bulk and converting everything into rental units that they can manage as they like. Now, to make matters worse for landlords, they're also increasing the tax that you pay on rental income, the property income, any income that you make from property. That one too kicks in from 2027. Earlier on, I talked about tax that you pay on dividends. That one is also going up by 2 percentage points, but that kicks in from next year. So tax going up on dividends and capital gains kick up from next year. But the tax on savings interest and now property income kicks in from 2027. Ahead of that, mansion tax in 2028. But again, the increase in tax on property income is only going up by about 2 percentage points. So whatever it is now, plus 2%. But essentially, it all just makes property ownership less attractive in the UK, especially to someone like me, who has always been skeptical about it, because it just highlights the concerns I've always had about having the bulk of your net worth locked into a single asset that you can't carry it with you. If you leave UK today, that property is staying here. You can't carry it with you. 1. 2, it's not liquid. You can't sell it like, I just want to get rid of this property and move. No, it doesn't happen like that. You have to wait, be patient, find a buyer. And funny thing is, the average person in this UK, 40% of their net worth is locked into property. But the average homeowner in this country, 40%, close to half of their net worth, is locked into the house they live in. So the value of that house is 40% of their net worth. The next thing that is close to that is their pension. 40% of their net worth is locked in the house they live in and own. 35% is in pensions. That's 75% of all their assets locked into just two things that are not easily movable and not easily liquidated. People will tell you property is forced savings. It's like people's pensions. So people treat property like pensions. It's good. It's just all these rule changes make me, as an individual, less inclined And to be fair, you can move your pension if for whatever reason you have to relocate to a different country. You can move your pension. It's just that there are certain rules around it, how you liquidate or how you transfer and all that. So you can't just move to Dubai for 2 years, liquidate your pension, use it and come back to the country. No, it doesn't work like that. There are rules around how you can withdraw your pension before a certain age. One interesting detail for Nigerians in particular is that, in case you didn't know, you can also access up to 25% of your Nigerian pensions once you stopped working in the country for up to 4 months. So you can access up to 25% of your Nigerian pensions, but that's a segue for Nigerians. Now, personally, what I prefer to do is grow the portion of my net worth that is within my control, like stocks and shares. They are liquid and they are globally diversified. Unfortunately, UK is a small portion of the global stock market right now. So if you buy a globally diversified ETF, UK will only be like 4%. You can move that ETF. You can sell it anytime you like. If it's a nicer, it's even better. You can sell it on one platform and buy it in the next, right? So that's my own personal approach towards investing. But of course, there are people that are doing well with property. Don't let me dissuade you. There are people doing well with property, people that have property portfolios. Actually, maybe one of these days I'll invite one of my friends that is into property and we'll talk about it. Let me know if you'd be interested in that in the comments. Now, the fifth thing that I wanted to talk about, right? I don't think anybody actually covered this, is the positives. Now, I know in this country, complaining is like a national pastime. It's like we look for reasons to complain. It's a gloomy weather, so I guess why people will be down in the dumps. But there are some positive things that were announced in the autumn budget speech. I'll just list them quick rapid fire. They've allocated more spending for schools and healthcare between now and 2030. From next year, they will be funding free apprentice training for young people, where they will actually be paid to learn for 18 months. The idea there is to encourage work over people just trying to get unemployment benefits, which overall will continue to boost the economic growth. They're freezing prescription charges for NHS until 2027, basically 1 more year. They're also freezing railway fares until 2027. Just reduces your costs. Energy bills, they've done some gymnastics. It's going to drop by about £150 across homes on average. And they're investing more into transportation. They're also mandating petrol stations to have some that shows you if you are getting the cheapest price in that filling station or not, or basically allows you to know if you can get cheaper prices elsewhere. For those of us that have cars, I don't have a car. It's not only individuals that are benefiting. Companies are also benefiting. They've introduced a particular listing relief to encourage small businesses to list on the London Stock Exchange. And then there's our favorite buzzword of today. You know what it is? AI. The UK government is going to put about £2 billion behind that. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to set up some sort of Silicon Valley in Wales. So if AI, agentic AI, all this stuff, if that's your jam, you know where you need to be. Now, there are a few red flags for me that neither Martin Lewis nor Damien Talks Money nor anyone else that I've listened to actually covered. And I understand why. Because for me, there was one particular red flag that it affects people that were not born in the UK, people like me. So for instance, they want to increase the number of years that you need for you to be eligible for state pensions. They are basically reviewing the minimum requirements for you to qualify for state pensions. Part of the qualification requires the number of years that you must have lived and worked in the UK and the number of years contribution that you must have made. I think you must have contributed minimum of 10 years for you to get anything, for you to get the minimum amount of state pension weekly. And then if you want to get your full state pension, you must have contributed 35 years worth of NI. But you must have lived and worked in the UK for a minimum of 3 years. So I think the way it works today, there is a voluntary NI contribution that you can make. And there's a lower version of it that you can pay. But they want to restrict it to only people that are physically in the country. Now, I really don't care much about state pensions because even the full state pension, in most cases, is going to complement whatever you're already getting from your workplace pensions. That's really the one I prioritize and focus on when I look at pensions. However, what bothers me about that change and that announcement, even more than all the other changes, because the other changes, I can see the reason why. What bothers me about this one is the reason that they gave. Because they said it's basically to discourage people who want to contribute and then relocate to a different country and be living there. See, why that worries me is, one, there are British people relocating. British people who live in Spain. There are plenty of British people in Dubai. British people relocate to other parts of the world, so it's fine. But then again, as an immigrant, there will always be that dream that one day you want to relocate back home. So if I had been banking on something like state pensions, okay, fine. I've worked in this country for how long, contributed so much. Let me even go back to my own country. But at least I've contributed the minimum that I need to contribute to state pensions. I should have access to it. What worries me is when the British government, and it's not just this particular administration, when they start to complain about expats or immigrants benefiting from following the rules that they laid down, then they call those rules loopholes. I don't understand. You put the rule down, someone followed the rules. They didn't break any laws. Because the problem with that is that mentality triggers certain policies that in the long run start to backfire on the country, on the economy, and generally doesn't help anyone concerned, from the UK government to the UK citizens to the expats that they're trying to attack. So that mindset, that narrative worries me, to say, oh, people that are abroad, that because they've been benefiting from a loophole in state pensions. I don't understand. Did they contribute what they were meant to contribute or not? They didn't create the loophole. Whether it's fair or not, totally different conversation. Feel free to blame the previous administration, but don't blame the people that followed. They can take their state pension. But the problem is, when you start to think like that, then they start to look at other things that they can't touch. The good thing is, all these rules have some time before they are implemented. The other thing that I considered a bit of a red flag was, she mentioned that they were looking at selling some government assets. Now, I agree that certain things are better run by the private sector in certain parts of the world. But when you look at the likes of the water companies, when you look at the railway companies, when you look at steel, recent experience has shown that in this particular country, the government seems to have better experience and expertise with handling certain infrastructure. So I worry when they start to talk about the offload certain things that are not important to. She didn't mention in which specific government assets in the speech, but approach with caution. Now, one thing that I don't think anybody covered, they're removing import duty waivers. So basically, for small items that are imported, you don't pay duties. That's why companies like Temu and all these small Chinese companies can't sell their items at rock bottom prices because they're not paying any duties. They bring them in and they sell them cheap because they're not paying import duties. Now, the government has had an issue with Temu for a while. Even me personally, I have issues with Temu. But the government has an issue with Temu because they claim they're not paying the full amount of taxes that they should be paying or could be paying. So they're taking away the import duty waivers. The implication is items on Temu, their prices would go up. So you may want to consider something like Amazon Haul, because Amazon basically introduced Amazon Haul in response to Temu. So if Amazon is not affected, you could consider Amazon Haul instead. But what they did say was it applies to online retailers. They're removing it from online retailers. So I guess they're leaving it for retailers that have physical stores like your John Lewis and all that, because the intent is to help brick and mortar stores and high street stores, or is it main streets? They call it main street stores. But aside from those two things, when I look at the budget as a whole, and not just the sound bites from different videos and different articles by the BBC or whoever, on balance, it was good. Not because I won't be affected by the tax increases or the caps on salary sacrifice or all those other things. It was good because they tried their best to work within the constraints that they've given themselves. They put certain restrictions on themselves. They don't want to borrow more because we're already paying 10% of government revenue on debt. And they also promised not to raise taxes, although they raised taxes, but they can claim now that they haven't raised income taxes. Although again, when you consider stealth tax, they've raised it. But they put themselves in a tight corner where it was almost impossible for them not to officially raise taxes. And they've managed to wiggle out of it, which is impressive enough. And they've also promised not to introduce austerity measures, meaning they will continue to spend money, which is good because this country went through austerity in the 2010s and it wasn't a pretty picture. I keep saying it. There was a budget deficit of about 40 billion pounds and they managed to sort that out without borrowing more money. It's commendable. But then again, we're the ones paying for it. It is what it is. One way or the other, you pay for it. You either pay with a slower economy because of borrowing or you pay with taxes. So as she kept saying, these were their choices.
They were the fair and necessary choices. These are my choices. The right choices. These are my choices. My choices. So my choice, I've made my choices. Those are the Labour choices. That is my choice. That is the Labour choice. Those are my choices. Those are my choices. Those are Labour choices. Promised and delivered by this budget. But we made these choices for a reason.
They made some hard choices. And I like the fact that Rachel Reeves kept referring to various pressure groups. She kept referring to people that she consulted with, people that suggested certain things, that she was going through it, people that did the analysis and the work. So they thought through these changes. And I even suspect that the leaks or the rumors that had been circulating all year long on these changes were intentional, so that they could test some of those ideas on the public and see how people responded to them. Damien wasn't happy with that particular fact because he felt the rumors caused more damage than the actual changes being announced. I disagree, but then again, I don't invest in bonds. But I'd rather have rumors. I kept telling people all through the year, I don't know why people are making videos on rumors. Let them announce the facts first. I don't respond to rumors until something is confirmed. I don't respond to it. I think it was smart of them. And I think the bond markets also agree. If you check the interest rates, I checked the interest rates for UK bonds on Friday, and they were actually dropping. Why is that important? If you compare it with the autumn budget announcement from Liz Truss in 2022, where as it was announcing the changes like this, interest rates were shooting to the sky. Interest rates basically tell you how, if you use a country like Nigeria as an example, our interest rates are high because investors feel it's a high risk environment. So it's the same thing here. When people feel the government is not managing things properly, because bonds are usually more for conservative investors. So bond rates typically respond quickly to how the market feels the government is performing. So if they feel the government is going to be making good decisions in the near future, people will try and invest more. So with more people buying those bonds, the interest rates will drop. But if people feel the government is messing up, people start to sell their bonds. So of course, if more people are trying to sell, the interest rates will go up. So it gives you an idea of how seasoned investors feel about the announcements. I think it's valuable for you to also watch the Rachel Reeves' full speech itself. I'll leave the link in the description because she listed a lot of things that need to be funded and their plans to fund them. For instance, they're introducing excise on electric cars on one hand, and then on the other, they are giving grants to electric car manufacturers and funding more e-chargers. On one hand, they're putting a cap on how much people can put into pensions without paying NI. On the other hand, they're also introducing ways to protect existing pensions from inflation. As she said, those were her choices. If you leave a comment below and let me know if you agree with her choices, which ones you agree with and which ones you don't agree with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.